TypeScript. So before we get started, let's first look at the requirements for this course. So guys, to learn TypeScript, the only requirement is that you know JavaScript. So guys, if you know JavaScript well, TypeScript will be extremely easy for you. So the only requirement for this course is JavaScript. So now let's answer the question, what is TypeScript? So guys, TypeScript gives us additional features on top of JavaScript. And one of those features includes static types. Now, if you don't know what static types are, it's alright, we'll go over it shortly. Moving on to the next point. TypeScript compiles to regular JavaScript. So the browser can't run TypeScript code. It needs to be compiled to regular JavaScript so the browser can run it. So there's a TypeScript compiler that compiles the TypeScript code into regular JavaScript so that the browser can execute it. And lastly, TypeScript is made and maintained by Microsoft. So that's how you know it's a very powerful tool. And so now that we have a basic idea of what TypeScript is, let's find out why we should use it. So first of all, using TypeScript makes our code more readable and maintainable. Second, it makes our code more robust. This basically means that there's less bugs in our code. And third, it lets us catch errors in the editor rather than in production. So guys, if you're using TypeScript and you have an error, you'll see it in your editor. Whereas if you're using JavaScript and you don't catch the error, you're going to push that code into production and then one of your customers will catch the error. So essentially using TypeScript, you'll catch bugs in your code before you push it into production. And lastly, this is probably the most important point for us. It is very popular among tech companies. Guys, almost every single tech company uses TypeScript. Almost none of them use regular JavaScript for their tech stack. So companies like Microsoft and Google, they use TypeScript because it makes their code more robust, which means it's less prone to bugs. And guys, if you're applying to companies and you have TypeScript on your resume, that'll put you far ahead of people that just have JavaScript. So if you know TypeScript, it increases your chances of getting a job by a lot. So enough of the slides, let's now write some code. So guys, the first thing we need to do is we need to install TypeScript. So open up your terminal and then type npm install and then -g for global and then TypeScript. And guys, if you're on Mac, you need to add sudo before it. So sudo npm install -g TypeScript. And then you'll be required to type in your password. And then TypeScript should be globally installed in your computer. So to check that, you can type tsc, that stands for TypeScript compiler, and then -v. And then you should see version 4.9.5 or whichever version you're on. So now you can create a new folder. You can call it anything. I'm going to be calling it TypeScript Crash Course. So guys, make this full screen and then create a new file and it has to end in .ts. So let's name it index.ts. So guys, now let's write our first TypeScript code. But guys, before we do that, I need to mention something. And that is that this course might be kind of boring. And that's because there's not much to learn for TypeScript. I will just show you a bunch of things and you need to memorize them. That's pretty much all there is to this crash course. In other crash courses, we have something new to learn. So what we build is exciting. But in this case, it's not like that. There's a lot of tedious stuff that you just have to push through. And trust me, at the end of it, when you learn TypeScript and you build very complex projects, TypeScript will be a savior for you. It'll make everything so much easier. You'll understand the code just by looking at it. So that's why learning TypeScript may be a bit tedious and boring, but at the end of it, it's worth it. So just hang on and push through and you'll have a job in no time. So now let's write our first TypeScript code. So guys, in normal JavaScript, you declare variables like this. So you would say let age equal 25. Now this is no problem, but guys, in TypeScript, you need to mention the type before declaring the variable. So you need to declare that it's a number like this. So after the name of the variable, you have a colon and then you say what type the variable is. In this case, age is a number. So now down here, if I make the age a string, so something like this, then we can see an error in the editor. It's complaining about something. It says type string is not assignable to type number. Because we said it's a number over here, we can't change it to a string. But if we make this something like 13, then you can see that it's not complaining anymore. So that's because this variable is a number, you can only change it to a number. So the reason for doing this is that it makes our code more robust. Right now, it may seem like we're adding more code for no reason, but when the project is very big with hundreds of files, then having this kind of type system is very helpful. So guys, this over here is known as static typing. That's basically mentioning the type before declaring a variable. So now if you wanted to make a hobby variable, so let hobby, and we wanted it to be a string, then we just have a colon and then we say string and then we assign the value. Let's say soccer. So now this hobby can't be anything but a string. So if I make the hobby a number, you can see that we get an error. And if you make it a boolean, you can see we also get an error. So guys, these are the basic types. So let me just comment that here so you guys understand. Basic types. And then we can also have a boolean. So let is adult. This person is 25, so that's true. So we need to declare the type, which is boolean, and we can make that equal to true because the person's 25. So guys, we will go over more types soon, but before that, I need to introduce you to the TypeScript compiler. So guys, from the slides, do you remember that TypeScript is compiled into regular JavaScript? And that's because the browser can't run TypeScript. So it's compiled into regular JavaScript using the TypeScript compiler. So how you use the TypeScript compiler is like this. So first save your file, and then open up your terminal, and then just type tsc and the name of the file, which is index. So once you press enter, you should see an index.js file being created. So here what's happening is that we have the index.ts file, and so the TypeScript compiler is compiling this code and turning it into regular JavaScript and putting it into this index.js file. But you can see that they're using var instead of let, and that's because by default the compiler is using an older version of ES. So guys, to change the way the compiler behaves, we need to edit the tsconfig file. So guys, if you go to your terminal and type tsc --init, and then you press enter, you should see a tsconfig.json file being created. Now this file is used to configure the behavior of the compiler. Okay guys, I know that this looks extremely confusing, but don't worry, you don't need to know any of this right now. All you have to know is this target. So you use this target property to specify what version of JavaScript you want your TypeScript to be compiled to. So in this case, we have ES 2016. This is ES 7. So this means we should be using var in our index.js, but we're not. And why is that? And that's because when you first ran the command over here, we said tsc and we specified the file name. So when we say tsc and we specify the file name like this, so tsc index, then the TypeScript compiler compiles to the default settings. And the default settings is set to ES3. So when we run the command tsc space index and we press enter, nothing changes. And that's because by default, the compiler compiles to ES3. So we're using var. So to change that, to use the settings in our tsconfig file, all we have to do is just run the command tsc. We don't need anything else. We just run the command tsc and we press enter. And then you can see we start using let. So when we just run the command tsc, we're using the settings in the tsconfig file. But when we type the command tsc and then space the file name, then we compile to the default settings, which is ES3. So that's how we can make sure that our TypeScript compiles to ES7 JavaScript. Also guys, I understand that it can be extremely tedious to keep on typing the tsc command every time we want to compile our TypeScript code. So to combat that, we can just say tsc --watch. And what this will do is that it'll watch our file and then it'll compile automatically every time we save. So if I open this to the side like this, and then I have a new variable, so something like let fruit, which is a string, equal to apple. And now if I save, it's automatically in our JavaScript file. So it's compiled automatically. So all we have to say for that was tsc space --watch. So now that we have the setup down, let's move on to learning more TypeScript. So you can close this and you can close the tsconfig file and you can close the terminal. And now let's move on with the course. So guys, we went over the basic types, which is number, string, and boolean. But what if you wanted a variable that can have any type? So it can be a string, number, or anything. Then all you have to do is specify the type as any. So you just add any here, and now this variable can be anything. So if I change this fruit to equal a number, you can see that we're not getting any errors because it's set to any, and we can change it to anything else and we have no problems. But if you use any, you're not getting all the benefits of TypeScript, so it's not recommended that you use any. So make sure you don't use any too often. So now we can get rid of this, and now let's move on to declaring arrays. Say we wanted an array of fruits, so we can say let fruits, and then we add the type, and we want this array to only have strings, so we can say string, and then to specify that it's an array, we just add the 2 square brackets like this. So this is saying that this array can only have strings inside. So we can have an apple and an orange, and we have no problems. But the moment we have something like a number, we get an error that says type number is not assignable to type string, because we can only have strings inside this array. So recap, to declare an array, you do the same thing, you have a colon, and then you specify what type the array can contain. So in this case, it's just strings, and then you use the 2 square brackets to signify that this is an array. So we can get rid of this. But now what if you wanted an array that can have any type of values? So you can have a string, boolean, and number. So all you have to do is create the array, so let array, and for the type, you specify any. And then you use the 2 square brackets to specify that's an array, and now this array can have any values. So you can have a number, you can have a string, and you can have a boolean, and we have no problems. But now what if you wanted to have an array of arrays? So essentially we have an array, and inside this array we have arrays with a number inside. So how can we do that in TypeScript? Well, we can say let num array. So first we need to specify the type of array. So in this case it's a number, and then we use the square brackets to signify that it's an array, and then we add another square bracket to show that this is an array of arrays. So we're saying that this variable is an array of arrays that can have numbers inside. So now if you have another array with a string, we're going to get an error, and that's because we cannot have a string inside this number. So summing it up, this is saying that this variable is an array of arrays, and the arrays can only have numbers inside it. So we can delete this. So that's this part done. And now let's move on to the next thing, which is tuples. First of all, what is a tuple? So guys, in mathematics, a tuple means an ordered set of values. So that can be something like an array, and we know that the first thing is a number and the second thing is a string. So we know that this array only has two values, and the first value is a number and the second value is a string. So this is a tuple. So we can create a variable called employee. So let employee, and then we use the colon to specify this is a tuple, and that can equal to an array with a number and a string. So this array must have a number and a string in the same order. So the first value must be a number like 1, and the second value must be a string. So let's say Jack. So now we're not getting errors. But if we had a third value like 3, then we're getting an error because you can only have 2 elements inside because it's a tuple. We specified that you can only have 2 values. And we'll also get an error if we swap the values. If the first value was a string and the second value was a number, we will still get an error because it needs to be in the same order. We need to have a number first and then the string. So we can change that, and now we have no problems. So guys, now let's create an array of tuples. So we want an array, and the array will contain tuples. So you can call a new array employees. So let employees, and then you have a colon, and then you specify the tuple. So we only want a number and a string. And then to show that it's an array of arrays, we need to add the 2 square brackets. And now this can be an array of tuples. So now you can have an array inside, and these arrays can only have 2 values, and the first one has to be a number, and the second one has to be a string. So if you have 2 and Sarah, we get no problems. But then if you create another array with a string first and then a number, then we get an error. But if you swap the values, 3 and Jack, then no problems. We can have as many as these as we want, as long as there's only 2 values and the first value is a number and the second value is a string. So that's how we can create an array of tuples. And guys, now let's move on to objects. So how can we declare objects in TypeScript? So guys, by now you're probably getting the hang of TypeScript. It is very repetitive. So if you want to take a shot at creating an object on your own, then I'll give you some time and we'll go through it together once you're done. Welcome back guys, I hope you were able to create an object on your own, but if you weren't, it's alright. This could be a bit tricky, let's go through it together now. So guys, let's say you wanted to create a car object like this, and here's the property of a brand and the year. So let's say the brand is Lexus and the year is 2020. So now, how do you specify that this is an object? So guys, it's exactly like everything else. We add a colon after the name, and then we specify that it's an object by using 2 curly braces, and then we have the brand property. This will be of type string. And then we have the year property, which is of type number. So this is how you create objects with TypeScript. But guys, I know this can get messy, so there's something you can do, and that is creating custom types. So guys, what we want to do is create our own custom type, which is basically this car object. So how we do that is that we say type. So we say type and then the name of the type. So we want the name of our type to be car. So we say type car, and then we make that equal to an object, and then we add the values. So something like this. So now we can delete this and we can create a new variable. Let's call that car1. So let car1, and then we can use a colon and specify that it's of type car. So we created the car type over here, and we're specifying that this variable is of type car. So we just say car, and then we make it equal to an object. And now if you press Control space, you can see that we have autocomplete. We have the brand and the year, and that's because we're getting it from over here. So this is pretty powerful stuff. So now we can say the brand is Lexus and the year is 2020. However, if any of the values is different to what we specified, then we'll get an error. So if this was a string, then we instantly get an error. So guys, can you see how we can catch errors earlier in TypeScript? Right now, it may not seem like a big deal, but in very big projects, this is very useful. So guys, the next thing we need to learn is an interface. So guys, in cases like this, you'd probably not create an object type like this. For something like this, you want to use an interface, and we'll go through it shortly. But to create objects, you should not use it like this. So in cases where you want to create an object like this, you should use an interface. So guys, how you create an interface is pretty simple. So all you say is interface, so interface, and then the name of the interface. So we want it to be car, but since we already have car over here, I'm just going to name it car1, and then use the 2 curly braces. So we don't have an equal sign here. And then you literally do the same thing as you did with the object. So you have a brand property, which is a string, and then you have a year property, which is a number. So now when you create a variable, so now we can say let car1, and now we can specify that this variable is of this interface. So we can say let car1 be of type car1. So guys, I know this is kind of confusing because both of them are car1. So we can just change this to new car. So this can be anything. We're saying that this variable is of the interface of car1, and then we can make it equal an object, and we get the same IntelliSense. So if you press Control space, you can see we have brand and year. So the brand, let's call it Lexus. And the year is 2020. And this works the same way as this. So if we change this to a string, we'd get an error because we specified that it's of type number. So guys, it doesn't really matter which way you choose, if you use a type or an interface, but I personally like to use interface for this, but at the end of the day, it's really up to you. So guys, that's interfaces done. And now let's move on to the next thing, which is unions. So guys, essentially what a union is essentially this bar over here. So essentially what a union lets you do is that it lets a variable hold more than one value. So for example, if you have a value called x, so let x, and then we want this x to either be a string or a number, then we can use a union. So we can say colon, and then we can say it's a string, and then we use the bar over here. So you can say union, so it's either a string or a number, and then you can assign it a number or a string, and you won't get any errors. But if you assign it any other type, like a boolean, then you're going to get an error. The boolean is not assignable to type string or number. So that's essentially what a union is. It's pretty straightforward. So we can change this back to a number, say 22. And now let's move on. So guys, you can use unions and custom types to create a variable that can only have two values. So let's see what I mean. So let's say we create a type of occupation. So type occupation. And now we want this to either be employed or student. So we can make it equal employed like this as a string. And then we can use a union, so or a student. And now if you create a new variable called Jack occupation, so let Jack occupation, and we specify that this type is of occupation, and now we make it equal anything other than these two values, so for example just A, then we get an error because we can only assign it either employed or student. So if we change this to employed, we don't get the error anymore, and if we change this to student, we don't get the error anymore. So that's how you can combine unions and type. So guys, that's unions done. And now let's move on to the next thing, which is type assertion. So guys, what type assertion is that say you have a variable of any value. So we can say let y be of any value. And at first it's a string. So now using type assertion, you can specify that when you change this value, it can be any other type. So what do I mean by that? Say you want to change the value of y and it needs to be a number. So then you can say y is equal to, and then use the two angle brackets like this. And then you specify that it needs to be a number. And then you can just make it a number like 22. However, if you assert that it's of type number and then you change it to a string, then you get an error because this is not a number anymore. So this is essentially type assertion, is that you want this to become a number. So now we can change this to a number so we don't get an error. And now let's move on to the next concept, which is very important, and it's functions. So guys, how you create a function in TypeScript is like this. Say you want to write a function that adds two values. So you can say function add. And when you put the parameters like x and y, you need to specify what type they are. So in this case, this x will be a number, and this y will also be a number. And then before you have the curly braces, you need to also specify what this function will return. So we're adding two numbers, so this function should return a number. And then we have a colon, and then we specify what this function is returning, and in this case, it's a number. So now we can just return x plus y, and as you can see, we don't get any errors. But now if we call the add function and we have a number and then we have a string, then as you can see, we're going to get an error because this can only be a number because we assigned it as a number. And also if the function returns anything other than a number, so say it returns a boolean like true, then we also get an error because we need to return a number. So you can just say x plus y. So that's essentially how you write functions in TypeScript. Okay, that's fine, but what do we do with functions that don't return anything? Because sometimes there are functions that don't return anything. So for example, if you have a function called say hi, and all it does is that it just logs hi, so console.log hi. So this function is not returning anything. So we can specify that by saying void. So we have a colon here before the curly braces, and then we say void. So this is saying that this function doesn't return anything. So it's void. So that's how you write functions that don't return anything. So guys, now let's move on to the next function example. Say we wanted to write a function that makes a copy of an array. So we have a function called copy array, and it will take in an array and it will return a copy of the array. So we just return an array and we spread the passed in array. So essentially this function is taking an array and then it's returning a copy of that array. But now this array can have anything. It can have all strings or all numbers. So how do you specify that? So guys, this is where we use generics. So after the name of the function, you have two angle brackets like this, and then you just put a t here. So this t is basically like a placeholder. And what we return is also an array of t. And guys, this array will also have a type of t. So t an array. So guys, what essentially is happening here is that we're giving this function a placeholder where t is the placeholder. So this t can be anything. So what do I mean by that? say we create a new variable called numCopy. So let numCopy equal, and then we can call the copy array function. So we can say copy array, and then we can pass in number instead of this t over here, and then we can pass in a number of arrays. So now as you can see, we're not getting any error. And now if you wanted to pass in an array of strings, then all we have to do is just copy this and then make this string array. And then instead of having number here, we change it to string. So now as you can see, we're getting an error because these are not strings. So now if you turn these into strings, you can see that we're not getting an error anymore. So essentially we're saying that this t is a placeholder, and then when we call the function, we specify what t is, which is a number or a string. So this is what's known as generics. So this whole thing was generics. And guys, now we can move on to the final thing, which is enums. So guys, what is an enum? So guys, an enum is basically a bunch of options. So essentially, if a thing can have a bunch of options, then you'd use enums. So this is how you create an enum. So you just say enum, and then the name of the enum. So let's say eye color. And then you use the 2 curly braces. And then over here, you can have the eye colors. So for example, we can have a brown eye color, and we can have a blue eye color, and we can have a green eye color. And then what you can do is that you can make these values be equal to something. So we can make this equal to a string. So something like common eye color. And then we can make the blue eye color equal to rare eye color. And then we can make this green equal to very rare eye color. So that's essentially what an enum is. But guys, what's the point of this? Why do we do this? Well, to understand why we did this, let's look at an example. Say we wanted to create a function that displays the information about students. So we can call the function display_student. And this function will take in a student object. So student, and this will be a student interface. So we'll create that shortly. So let's quickly create a student interface. So we can say interface and then student. And then this will have a name, which is of type string. And then age, which is of type number. And then we have eye color, which is of type this enum eye color. So we can just specify eye color. So as you can see, it's right there. So the student that we're passing in is of this interface. So we need to specify the interface, which is student. And now this will return void because this function won't return anything. It will just display the name on the website. So guys, now we can say const info, and this will be of type string is equal to, the first thing will be the student.name. So guys, as you can see, we're already getting autocomplete. So this is why TypeScript is so powerful. We're getting all these powerful tools. Whereas if we use normal JavaScript, we'd have to find the object and then find all the properties and then use it here. But in TypeScript, we're getting all this autocomplete. So the first thing will be the name, and then we can add a new line character, and then the age of the student. So student.age, and then another new line character. And then finally, the eye color of the student, which is student.eyeColor. So now we can get the document, and then we can make the inner text this info. So now we can say document.body.innerText is just equal to info. So guys, now we can save, and now let's create our HTML file. So just create a new file and call it index.html, and then press exclamation mark and tab, and the body just add the script, and the source is index.js. So notice how we're not using the TypeScript file. That's because the browser can't execute TypeScript. So we need to add the JavaScript file. So index.js. So now we can save, and we can open this with live server. So guys, once you open it with live server and then we have it side by side like this, then we can go to an index.ts file, and then we can call this function. So guys, now we can call the display student function like this, and then we can pass in our student. So guys, as you know, we need a name. Let that be Jack. And guys, as you can see, we're already getting an error. And that's because we're missing some of the properties like age and eye color. So that's why it's so powerful, guys. We constantly are getting feedback. If we didn't have this, we'd catch this bug in production, and we don't want that. With TypeScript, we can catch it in the editor. And then we need to have an age. Let's say that's 20. And then the eye color, let's give it brown. And because this eye color is an enum, this is how you specify it. So you say the eye color is eye color, so the enum eye color, and then you can say whichever eye color this is. So for example, let's say Jack has brown eye color. So we choose brown. And now if we save, you can see the information appearing. Let me just zoom in over here. So guys, as you can see, we gave Jack the eye color of brown, but now we're displaying common eye color. So now if we change this student's eye color to blue, we'll get rare eye color. And if we change it to green, then we'll get very rare eye color. So that's why enums are so useful, guys. I use it all the time. So that's essentially how you'd use enums. And guys, before we finish off, I need to specify one more thing, and that is having optional properties. So guys, for example, in this interface student, we have a name, age, and eye color. And right now, if you don't have one of these properties, say for example, we don't have age, then we'd get an error because we're missing the age property. So what if you wanted age to be optional? Then what would we do? So guys, it's pretty simple. If you wanted age to be optional, then we just add a question mark over here. So guys, as you can see, the error went away, and that's because the age is now optional. So that's how you have optional properties in interfaces and objects. So now if we don't have an age here, it's undefined over here. So now if we add it again, so age 20, then it's no longer undefined. So that's all. This is pretty much the basics of TypeScript, and this is pretty much all you need to know for the upcoming projects. This isn't everything about TypeScript, but it's enough to get us started on projects. And so you'll learn more about TypeScript as you build complex projects. And guys, right now you might be thinking, what's the point of all of this? We're just adding more code for no reason. But trust me, in very big projects, TypeScript is actually very useful. You'll be thanking me that you learned TypeScript, because when you work on huge projects with like 30 engineers, having this type system makes the code very readable and maintainable, as it's already documented in the editor. So that's a TypeScript crash course. Congratulations on finishing it, and I'll see you in the next video.